Nothing screams geography or geospatial more than maps. Maps have guided human existence from the beginning of time. Excuse me. They help us to understand our world visually, and they are ubiquitous in our daily lives. Technology has made it so that now we not only use maps, we can all make them. Over the past 8 years, AGS has had the pleasure to work with OpenStreetMap, OSM, who brings to our advanced placement human geography teachers practical and always fun experiences to help teachers use maps in the classroom. We are happy that we were able to convince them to make the trip and join us today. In addition, right here at UMSL, we have a professor who is a nationally recognized expert in story maps, and she has practical examples of how to use story maps in the classroom. And very appropriately, to lead this session, we have Dr. Tara Mott, who is the NGA account manager for Esri. Tara?
Well, thank you, John. Appreciate it. So, as John just mentioned, he kind of gave a little bit of a title on this next section and what we're going to be covering. Just to let you know, so I am an account manager at Esri for NGA, the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, with Vice Admiral Sharp here. But I have a couple other roles at Esri, but then kind of on the side too. There's also the United States Geospatial-Intelligence Foundation has a St. Louis area working group. And I've been chairing this working group since 2018. And we've been kind of getting people together. And I see we have a K through 12 subcommittee, which we're also kind of working now in coordination with this talent initiative working group. There's a K through 12 subcommittee that another Tara, her name's Tara Vansel, she couldn't be here today because of a vacation, but she's been bringing together a lot of teachers and kind of focusing on training too. So I'm really excited to see how Tara and Retta are partnering kind of going forward. I see Drew McAllister there. He's been participating with the SLOG since probably what, 2018? 2020, so a long time. So he's been very involved here as an educator with Parkway Schools, right? Okay. Anyway, and I also actually, I'm an adjunct professor at Washington University here in St. Louis and at St. Louis University. So I'm getting a chance to teach some of these concepts as well. And so hearing Retta talk about making it fun, making things into apps, that makes a huge difference to kind of get the students more involved and relatable, what Zakita was talking about, and kind of bringing it to their level. All of those things I've definitely seen, and meeting the students where they are, make a big difference. So without further ado, this next section, as John said, was broken into two groups. We're going to have OpenStreetMap first, and our speakers are Jess Beutler, who's a program director at OpenStreetMap-US. She has been playing a role in strengthening and expanding OpenStreetMap for social impact, education, and civic engagement in the US. She's led participatory mapping initiatives centered on urban resilience, disaster management, response, and civic empowerment in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and even the Caribbean. And then working with her today is Stephen Johnson, and they both support Teach OSM, or Teach OpenStreetMap. But he's been working on this project to promote the use of OpenStreetMap to teach geography and other subjects. He is also, since an adjunct professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So I would now like to welcome them to the stage, Stephen and Jess. Hi there.
Good morning. How's everybody? Good, good. We're excited to be here with this. And before we get started, if you brought your laptops, please get them out now and fire them up and get started. We have a little bit of interactivity planned for you this morning here. A couple things we want to engage with here. While you're getting this out, let me kick off a few questions. How many of you are geography teachers? Raise your hands real quick. How many of you are not geography teachers? Put it that way. Okay, and how many of you are like social science, environmental science? Raise your hands. History, arts? Okay, so it's a pretty good smattering, but it looks like about a half of you to maybe a third of you are geography teachers. AP Human Geography, raise your hands. Okay, so several of you have AP Human Geography as well. It's our understanding that AP Human Geographers tend to struggle with Unit 1, which is about maps, map scale, map reading, map intelligence, and we have it on good authority that people tend to struggle with that and move on to the juicy stuff in the later units of the AP Human Geography curriculum. And so our purpose today is to help remedy that and to help you to access maps in a different way. So we have a map on the screen here, and I just want to kind of kick things off talking about map literacy. And a couple questions here. Who do you think is the audience for this map? Yes.
Scientists who are interested in tectonic plates and how
I love that guess. That's a great guess, because I thought the same thing. Any other guesses? Yes?
I'm guessing, based on what I'm seeing there, I'm guessing it's a map for Americans made circa World War I to be like, this isn't just a European problem.
That's another good guess. I like that. Any other ones? I want to take a guess at this? Okay. This actually is an advertising map that was made in 1968 for TWA Airlines, which is, of course, long gone and defunct. But the point of asking this is map literacy. How do you determine good mapping from bad mapping? I mean, what kinds of criteria do you use in judgment? Now, with the illustration up here, you can see, oh, TWA, it's an airline. They're promoting flights. They're doing this. So you kind of have a clue that this is not really a cartographic product. It's an advertising product. Furthermore, if you look at the Iberian Peninsula and the northwest coast of France, it's really badly distorted. So that might be your first clue that this isn't such a great map, right? So, oops, there we go. Our objective today is to help you increase your agency with maps, and we want to do that with three things. First of all, I have a few techniques and tricks and things like that we can use to access maps, and we'll move from kind of paper to digital with that. I'll pass things off to Jess to talk about open mapping and where open mapping fits into the ecosystem of geographic education, and how you can turn from just consuming maps to actually producing the maps. And we'll wrap things up with how you can use open source tools that are available now to improve your geospatial perspective as well as your students as well. So, okay, let's kick things off here. Maps are the way we index the landscape, right? It's the way we find things and keep them found across in the spatial realm. It's a tool to understand, and this is important, a tool to understand processes. We think of maps as being a static thing on the wall that we look at, and that it's, but it's a snapshot in time, but it's a way to understand geographic processes. Think about erosion and things like that. That's a process that we can kind of think. So it's a tool to understand these relationships between these things. And we noticed that, and Admiral Sharp said that, time and distance and, that everything happens in some place in some time, right? It's all related with this. Maps are a way for interpreting those sorts of things. We can also use maps to define places and determine where, spaces and, spaces between places, and also as an aid to navigation and wayfinding. This is a map of St. Louis from the 1930s. It's a redlining map. And in terms of processes, how do these residential patterns from the 1930s inform spatial patterns in St. Louis today? So how do we use maps to find out those things? What can we use from this old map to discover about present trends in real estate usage in St. Louis? So this is the way we, using these maps, we can interpret these spatial relationships and these processes that take place over time using maps. Bear in mind also that maps are an assertion of authority and control. This is another one here where we're asserting control and administration of where people live, right? But it's how we perceive of the world and how we make sense of the world in a spatial context with that. So what makes a good map? There's several criteria that we use to determine what makes a good map. First of all, who's the audience for the map? Now, with the beginning map that we saw earlier, it wasn't, when I first showed it up, it wasn't really apparent that, it was an advertising map, right? So we had, tectonic plates and, those, they're all very good guesses, but, who's the intended audience for the map? Who's intended to interpret this? Until you saw that it was an advertisement for Trans World Airlines, you would never have known, that it was, without that context with it, it's hard to interpret who the audience for that is. Does the map fit the purpose? Is it, is it something drawn on the back of a cocktail napkin to get you from point A to point B, or is it a gas station map, or is it Google Maps that you use, or your GPS in your car? How reliable is that map for the intended purpose? In other words, things like accuracy and precision come into play here with maps. Both paper and digital maps can benefit from a good critique, which means that you should be able to size up a map, and you should be able to assist your students in sizing up what makes a good map, and we'll get to this in just a minute. The point here is that all maps are a compromise. They're an interpretation, and they're an assertion of the map maker's authority. So if, and we'll talk in a minute about how you can be a map maker and assert your own authority over the map as well. All maps are wrong. There are, and this is a problem. Now, the reason all maps are wrong is that we're taking this globe, we're taking this three-dimensional object, and we have to squash it into something flat, and that's a problem. So Gerardus Mercator in the 1500s developed this map that you see here. This, everybody knows the pull-down map, from the classrooms. It's always the Mercator projection in here. But what we don't see in that map that everybody's familiar with is how distortion factors in our perceptions of the world. So you can see the red circles indicate the levels of distortion here. And you can see on the poles of the Earth, you can see the South Pole stretches all the way across the bottom of the map. And you can see Greenland is wider at the top, but you can see with the red circles, Tissot's indicatrix, that where the distortion occurs. So this is a problem for all maps. And let's see. First exercise here, can you, what I want to do is walk through a couple of these. And so if you can get out your laptops and point your browsers to that first URL. If you need assistance, Jess is wandering the floor. She's got her hand up over here in the corner. So if you need some help getting to this. But what I would like you to do is point your browsers to this URL. And there's there's a few projections on there. And what I'd like you to do is just compare a handful of those. We have a couple minutes for this, so take a few seconds to pull that up. There are three different ways that we can take the globe and we can project that space into 3D space into 2D space. One is a cylinder, like we saw previously on the screen. It was a cylindrical projection. Another one takes a cone and puts a cone over the Earth. We can put it's called a conic projection. And the last one is a polar projection where we're looking from the top down. There's three different ways that we can do that. Now that has many different applications, as you can see here on these projections here. But please compare the familiar Mercator with conic equal area, for example. What's interesting is to look at the middle latitudes, like like St. Louis, for example, and compare it with, like, say, the tropics or very high latitudes like Oslo or Stockholm or Helsinki, things like that, because you can see the distortion you can compare the distortion between the two projections and see which one is more aesthetically pleasing and which one fits your purpose as well. There are different projections preserve different properties. Some projections preserve distance, some preserves shapes, others preserve the area size, so it's important to do this one. Please, that seventh one down there, please take a look at that one and have a happy Valentine's Day. So B-O-N-N-E, Bonn projection. Make sure that you take a look at that one while you're there. Lovely projection. The important thing here is you can take, as long as you've got a mathematical surface, you can project the world onto anything, even if it's shaped like a heart. How's everybody doing? You need another 30 seconds? I'll give you another 30 seconds to play around with these. Make sure, compare on some of the other ones as well. The azimuthal projection is rather interesting as well, but preserves the lines between 2 points. And it produces some really strange-looking maps, but they're true to direction. Okay, you need another minute, another little bit? What's everybody think? You ready to move on? Okay. Second thing. Point your browser to the second link there, thetruesize.com. Give you a second to pull that up. Has everybody got it? Need another second? Okay, when you pull up the site, in the search box on the left-hand side, type in Greenland. And what I would like for you to do is click on Greenland and drag it down into the continent of Africa. Now, the cool thing about this is you can see what the plain old vanilla Mercator projection does to distort the map. And this is a graphic illustration of how that projection introduces distortion into that. But the fun thing about this is when you compare Greenland and you really see the true size, how many Greenlands you can fit into the continent of Africa. And to me, this is like a real, aha moment for students when they can see, oh, this is how much distortion is introduced into this map. And if I want a reliable, view of the world, maybe I need to pay attention to the projection of my map. I'll give you a couple more seconds to play around with that because it's kind of a cool tool. You can drag England into the continent of Africa as well. That's another good one to do. Or drag China down to the equator. That's another. But you get the point. You get the point that there's that distortion is introduced at every point of the map making process, and we can kind of diminish it. But I think the important thing here is to acknowledge it and make the user aware of what projection they're using and what possibilities of kinds of distortion, errors, inaccuracies, and things like that introduces into the map, and whether the map is suitable for the purpose that you're intending it to use. Okay, let's move on. We don't really operate so much in the paper environment anymore. I mean, we do as kind of the metaphor for mapping, but of course, the go-to now is not a gas station fold-up map. The go-to now is Google Maps. When we, sit down and we type in, destination, we figure out directions, and we use Google Maps. So how does all of this stuff get in there? This goes back, this technique for for GIS goes back to 1854 when Dr. John Snow pioneered the technique of the overlay technique. So back in 1854, there was a cholera outbreak in London, and the general theory at the time was that cholera was transmitted by miasma, that it was in the air that we breathe and all of this, and this is before the germ theory of disease came around. But Dr. John Snow said, you know, I have this hunch that it's coming from water. And so what he did was he plotted all the cholera cases on a map of London, and he figured out where everybody's getting their water from and pointed to the Broad Street pump. And he told the authorities that he said, if you take off the handle for the Broad Street pump, the cholera epidemic will subside. And in fact, it did. But the cool thing about that is that this technique of putting map on top of map and looking through layers of information was pioneered then. And this kind of, light box technique we used, prior to the digital era, we used light boxes to kind of put Mylar maps on top of them to see through. Well, of course, we don't do that anymore. But this overlay concept turns out to be fundamental for making the transition from paper to digital, because it's how we represent geographic features in space. There are three geographic features, there are three geometric types that can represent pretty much everything. There's points, which obviously, point features, 0 dimensions, it's just a single dot. Linear features, represented by a string of coordinate pairs, XY coordinate pairs, and polygons, another string of XY coordinate pairs where the first point is equal to the last point. So x1, y1 is equal to xn, x2. So they close at the end. But we use these points, lines, and polygons to represent all the phenomena on the face of the Earth. And what I would like for you to do is, at this point your browsers to OpenStreetMap.org, and we're going to look at some of these features and how they're represented in a modern map. So if you please point your browsers to OpenStreetMap.org. And once you get there, there's a search box in the top left-hand corner. Has everybody got it? And in the search box, please type Epcot. I think you can just Epcot and select the first entry. If you need assistance, Jess is wandering the floor back here, so. And I think if you select that first entry, that will take you to the Epcot Center in Orlando. And you should see something that looks like what's on the screen here. Has everybody got it? Okay, good. There's a query icon, and it looks like a little question mark. It's on the right-hand panel. There's a panel of controls on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on that question mark, and your cursor should change to a little question mark when you do that. Now, there's several features in here. What I would like you to do is click on some of them. Make sure that you're zoomed in sufficiently as well. Make sure that you're zoomed in, kind of like what we have here on the screen, so that you can click on individual pictures. If you've got all of Orlando in your view field, this won't work very well. So make sure that you zoom in appropriately. What I would like you to do is click on some of these features here. I would suggest clicking on that monorail, the monorail track there. Looks like the little loop. Has everybody got it? Yeah. What do you get? What does it say when you click on the rail? What's returned? And if you click on one of the shops, are you zoomed in enough to click on a shop? And how are the shops represented? Anyone tell me? Blurt it out. Yeah, some are points, and the buildings themselves should be what? Polygons, yeah. And the Epcot rail, the monorail, what would you expect that to be? Linear feature, exactly. So you get the point. You can use this, and feel free to use this with your students as well, and have them interrogate the map as well to determine geometric types that are represented in a modern map. But this is a quick exercise that you can do to kind of familiarize students with the different geometric types that you embed in a modern digital map with this. Need a few more seconds? You want to play for a few more seconds? Where does this data come from? That's an excellent question. This data comes from volunteers like you and me who get together and just add data to the map. Some of it's imported data, like if you're tech savvy, you can kind of import this into OpenStreetMap. A large portion of OpenStreetMap is generated by volunteers, just citizen mappers like you and me, who just add this data. Students, exactly. Yeah, a lot of students. And if you heard the youth mappers talk yesterday, they talked about how college students there's 300 chapters of youth mappers out there of college students who are adding data. This is a worldwide project. All right, let's keep things rolling here.
Steve, do you mind if I chime in on that?
Please.
He's an OpenStreetMapper, so I feel like he's on the inside. I'm friends with OpenStreetMappers, so I've got a little more of an external view. It's a global phenomenon. It is the most comprehensive vector-based map on the planet, and it's been bootstrapped by map nerds all over the world. And you go to the map in Germany, it feels very German. I mean, they have mapped every bench, every chair, every sauna. Berlin is bonkers. There's other places in the planet that have not received kind of the attention it should. Sub-Saharan Africa. So the Gates Foundation has funded, through the American Red Cross, all sorts of groups to help map Sub-Saharan Africa, because when you're trying to deliver vaccines for a disease, it's really hard to do it when the buildings aren't on the map. How would I know that I delivered vaccines there, right? So it's a worldwide phenomenon that everybody's allowed to participate in. Your classroom is allowed to participate in it. There's norms, right? There's how to be a good OpenStreetMap citizen. You can do bad things and have other people come and delete your edits because you did dumb things. But you can also just, in your classroom, in your community, decide that you want to be hardcore OpenStreetMap, and basically the horizons, you can go forever. And the map may look complete, but in many ways, as people who teach geography, like the bias that's built in, right? It's inherently never done, right? So you could do this for the rest of your professional career. Every student you ever teach could get involved in this. And even if they only make one edit, right, the one thing on their street in their neighborhood that somehow got missed by the mapping community, that kid has improved the global map, which is then in the back end consumed by Google, is consumed by Meta, is consumed by everybody on the back end. So sorry, Steve.
No, thank you for interjecting.
I love
Yeah.
Steve. I've known Steve a long time. But he's like teaching a class here. I'm like, bro, you're part of the biggest thing on the planet. It's huge, and everybody here can be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. That's good context for that, so thanks. All right, let's keep things moving. I want to introduce a technique that you can use with your students. I started things out with a junky advertising map and questioned everybody's credibility and ability to discern disinformation, misinformation on maps. So this is how do you size up a good map? So let's talk about this for a second here. We typically have several things. This is a beautiful, oops, it got sliced off. This beautiful map is from the 1940s, nice National Geographic map. Isn't it wonderful? Look at the color scheme on it. Isn't that nice? It's restful. You can see the contrast on it, nice fonts and everything. Look at the fonts in the ocean. Isn't that awesome? So you start out and you have this lovely map body, right? Look at the continents and the fonts and the line weights and everything. Beautiful stuff. So every map, of course, has a map body, but there's a lot of other critical stuff that goes with it. One of these things is, and it's optional, but an inset or an overview map, which is used to either, in this case, provide context, or for an inset is to show maybe a congested area. So you might show the state of Missouri, and you might zoom in on St. Louis to show St. Louis, something like that. There we go. Every map needs a title, I think. It's good to kind of know what you're looking at. And in this case, I think we have the world map describes what this is and how it is. It's short, it's snappy, it's to the point. We also have this scale. So we know, we have some reference for how many map units equals Earth units on here. We have, you see the little lines that floated in there. Those little lines of latitude and parallels of longitude, no, the other way around. Parallels of latitude and lines of longitude indicate the north, they orient the viewer to the map. Alternatively, we could have put a north arrow in here. We have some legend information in here that describes what's on the map. And we have some metadata that says, oh, this is a Van der Grinten projection. So it's not a Mercator projection. It shows, principal roads, some metadata that shows about, the details of this. So you can use that technique in order to size up a map pretty quickly with your students. But you can use that checklist with your students to say, is this a good map or not a good map? What's missing from this map? But you can, you often find maps that, they have no north arrow, they have no scale, and you can help your students to identify what is a meaningful map and what is a good map. The point of all this here is that these maps, telling us where these things are, especially in the OpenStreetMap context, can help us find where things are missing. Right? As Chris pointed out, Berlin is bonkers on the map, but then you go to sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot missing. So these maps can kind of help inform us not only to what's there, but what's also missing with that. I'm going to turn things over to Jess a little bit and talk more about the organizational aspects.
Okay, great. Microphone working? Awesome. Okay, so we have spent the majority of the session looking at ways that we can become better citizens through reading maps and how that changes the way that we look at maps and engage with really just understanding the world around us. But one thing we've alluded to but haven't dove into and is just as important as being able to understand the distortion or being able to see what's missing from a good map is also understanding who is making the map. So question for you all, when you think about old maps in particular, who are the map makers that you think of?
Old white dudes.
Old white dudes, bingo. Yeah, pretty much. Fluffy sleeves, fluffy beards, fluffy hats. So yeah, we have Mercator here. Also, I think I heard explorers as well. That's another one exactly. So again, a lot of white dudes. But I think this picture is from a government survey in Australia in the 1800s. And this is really how a lot of maps have been made for much of history, is by folks that look like this. How about maps today? These guys have never seen a Taco Bell or a Target. So when one gets out in your neighborhood, how is that getting on a map? Oh. Google. That's the one we think about, right? So these are what we think about when we think of map makers, whether it's an old map or a new map. But there's a lot of commonalities between these three pictures here. And that's that these map makers hold power, privilege, and money. And that's been the driving factor of maps for most of history. And that's okay. We need money to make maps oftentimes. But it's important for us to question, how does that change how we view the world? When there's only a handful of old white dudes making the maps, whose voices are missing from the maps that we are reading. And so when you are working with your students, when you look at a map, question who made that map and how are those people on that map represented? Did they have any agency in being represented on that map? For example, we have two cities here, two places halfway around the world from each other, Kibera in Kenya, and Mount Pulaski in Illinois might seem complete opposites, like they have nothing in common. But in fact, they have a lot in common, particularly in how they are represented on maps. Kibera being in an under-resourced part of the world, and Mount Pulaski being in a rural part of the United States, both for a long time have been under-mapped. And what I mean by under-mapped is you might be able to find their place name on a map, but what about the community garden that can help with food security? What about someone who's selling plantains that can help feed the neighborhood? That kind of information that might help a community, because both Kibera and Mount Pulaski, very different places when you look at the pictures, but both are under-mapped and battle food security issues. So being able to map what's important to a community, what those needs are, who is doing that? And we already dove into it, but OpenStreetMap is one of those solutions that can really shift the power dynamic of who is controlling the maps and how people are represented in their data. So we got a great intro to OpenStreetMap, but just to recap on that, it is the world's largest freely editable geospatial database in the world. It is a global project that anyone, anywhere in the world can edit and add data that's important to them. So if someone is living in Western Tanzania and their map never made it onto Google or a government map, they can add that to make sure that they are represented when, say, there are policy decisions made or there is a natural disaster, their community can be put onto that map. And so we've really shifted that power dynamic. Yes, there are still tons of companies that are contributing and governments contributing to OpenStreetMap because they've seen the value of it, but now it's a democratized map because communities can be the ones also contributing to the very same map. How many of you have received an Amazon delivery to your house? Awesome. It got there in part because of OpenStreetMap. AWS mapped every driveway in the United States because they wanted to get packages to your house. They mapped that in OpenStreetMap. So the same data that your students could be doing to support, say, a refugee crisis in northern Uganda, it's the same data set that's being used by the United Nations, by Microsoft, by Washington Post, New York Times. There's thousands of organizations, and now we're all contributing to one place where we can all use this data. And what's amazing about this is the detail that we can get to. Some folks might be more interested in making sure their deliveries get to them, so they'll make sure their driveway's on the map. But others might care about, say, pedestrian access, bicycle infrastructure. Do you know that accessibility ramps in the US used for wheelchair access? Nobody knows where they all are. Nobody knows how many there are in the US. But if we map them, we can figure that out, and we can find those gaps. And so a lot of communities are doing that. Like in Charlottesville, communities and mappers come together to map all of those wheelchair ramps so that they can advocate for better access for wheelchair users. So with OpenStreetMap and other open mapping projects, mapping has been ushered into this new era where maps are used as a tool for digital democracy and can be used by communities for that on-ramp to digital literacy, representation, and to be used as a tool for self-advocacy, which has really shifted the game of how we interact with maps and who has that power. So I'm going to speed up because we're running out of time here. But with going back to Kibera and going back to Mount Pulaski, with the issues that these communities might be facing, they've taken that into their own hands. Kibera is one of the largest slums in the world, but it's now one of the best mapped places in the world. And that was done by community members in that local area. It wasn't flying in experts from the US or the UK. It was people in that community adding to the map, and now resources can be figured out and brought into that neighborhood or that part of the city for their needs. And same with rural Illinois, just the same students actually were working on mapping Mount Pulaski and other parts of rural America for the same reason. So I'll try to push through this really quickly, but OpenStreetMap has really become this platform as well for students and educators to not only learn through active mapping, so not just consuming mapping, but becoming map makers themselves, and not only contributing to this global project, but being able to have those ready-made projects in their community. So if there is an issue you care about in your community, if there are flooding issues, or if you want to figure out where all those wheelchair ramps are, or if you want to map all of the little free libraries in your community, those are all things that students have on their own decided was important to them for one reason or another, and with their classes, with their teachers, are improving how they're represented on maps. And so we, Stephen and I are with Teach-OSM. It's a program of OpenStreetMap-US, and we're doing just that. We're working with students and educators, not only in the US, but globally, to try to help make this more accessible to students and educators. So I'll pass it off to Stephen.
All right. I want to give you three short examples before we dash off the stage here about some teachers who are actually using this in their classes now. Jamie Dickinson is in upstate New York, and she's using, she's an earth science teacher, and she's using OpenStreetMap in several different ways. A couple of them to map trees on the campus, which is a fascinating project, just trying to determine the carbon, the carbon saturation that trees act on their campus. Celeste Reynolds has been a long-time advocate of OpenStreetMap for the last 6 years. She's been working with her students with using OpenStreetMap largely to map refugee camps around the world, but she's also got an interesting project that she's starting with the local indigenous community, the Wampanoag tribe in Mashpee, Massachusetts. Greg Hill in Dallas has been using OpenStreetMap with his students, concentrating on field mapping, and they typically map their campus and gates and access and micro details that don't make it onto the bigger maps. So that's just 3 examples of how these of teachers just like you are embedding OpenStreetMap into their lessons and modules and everything. 3 things that we do. We provide curriculum and modules. If you go to teachosm.org and click under projects, you'll find a ton of different resources that you can use through there. We also provide mentorships. We try to match teachers like you with geeky mappers like us. And we do, from time to time, sponsor some professional development grants. We had a challenge grant last year that was undertaken by a couple schools to do a cross mapping on US 40 going through Western Pennsylvania and Maryland. It was a very successful project. So with that, I will turn things over, and please get in touch with us, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Jess. No, that was great. Tons of resources out there, and I love the interactive and hands-on stuff that we could do here today. So, and there's a lot more, not that this next session is going to be hands-on right now, but there's a lot more other activities that can be done to kind of help learn some of these concepts and bring them into the classroom.